welcome to the Flying Cat Marketing Interview Series. Today I have Brad Smith, who is the CEO of Wordable, which is a tool that is actually pretty awesome. You can just copy Google Docs information straight into WordPress, saving you time uploading your content. He's partner and owner at uSERP, a link building agency, and Codeless, which has a great tagline: writers suck at marketing, marketers suck at writing. We get both. And providing some content packages. So thank you for joining us today, Brad, all the way from beautiful Hawaii.
Thank you. It'll be my pleasure, I'm sure.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about what you have going on these days. Where's your focus?
For sure. I have too much going on. My focus is on Wordable. So we acquired it about a year ago now, and then we proceeded to completely rebuild it from scratch, which is a bigger decision that I should have probably made a year ago. But we completely rebuilt it from scratch because we think that we're taking it in a cool, interesting direction and adding a lot of new stuff that we can get into. And we weren't able to do that with the original product. So we had to just kind of re-engineer it and bring it up to kind of current standards. So a lot of my focus is there and repositioning and kind of getting the new version of Wordable off the ground. I'm still owner at uSERP and Codeless, but we have awesome teams there too who are running a lot of the day-to-day and doing all the actual work that they should get credit for. And so while I just kind of gallivant on podcasts and with new ideas that cost me a lot of money. So that's where my focus is at currently.
Okay, I've actually used Wordable, and
oh, cool.
I'm trying to get it into our systems because it does provide a lot of value if you can get it
awesome.
to do that. So tell me, you have helped a lot of tech companies grow their user base through content marketing. What's your most effective content asset?
That's a good question. For lack of a better word, I would say 90% of what we do is like an article. So it's like your standard 2,000 word article. And I think maybe what makes us a little different is that we focus on a lot of like high volume and a lot of production. And I think that that's what we do well in that. I don't think there's a lot of like secrets anymore. Fortunately or unfortunately for many people, it's just about executing better. And so I think that like the vast majority of, we still do other stuff. We still do, content upgrades. We still do some ebooks or white papers here and there. We still do other types of content, but the vast majority of our stuff is just your straightforward, 1,000 to 2,000 word, in-depth article, expert insight or quotes, like all that kind of stuff that you probably see in most places. We just try to do more of it and do it better, basically. So
great. So actually, you did mention you have a simple content system that delivers tangible results in a way that combines content approaches that doesn't overwhelm your team. So tell me a little bit more about this, because you mentioned high publishing volume. So that's a lot of work, right? What's this
For
content
sure.
system?
So, I mean, from a super high level, from a broad level, we really specialize roles internally, and we treat it almost like a manufacturing process. And the original idea actually came from how like professional kitchens are organized. So in other words, when somebody hires us, they're getting like a small team. It's not just like a writer. So it's multiple writers, it's an account manager, project manager, designers, video people, strategy people, analysts, like this whole broader thing. And the reason we do that is because each person just focuses on like their specific part of the overall process. That doesn't work at low volume. Like it's really expensive to do that. And there's a lot of people involved, a lot of salaries and other things you can imagine. But at scale, it scales a lot better. So if you have this kind of little infrastructure or team approach built out, it's really easy to go from like 50 to 100 articles or 100 to 150, because all you're doing is really like adding additional writers based on their capacity, their skill sets, all that kind of stuff. And you're not really having to add a ton of extra like quote unquote overhead at that point. So it's one of those things that, again, it's very like, maybe it's part philosophical, part, practical. In that we think it's like a lot of companies today, because of how difficult and competitive everything is, you kind of need quality and quantity.
Yeah.
It's not just good enough to just kind of like throw out a post a month. when you have all these like hyper competitive spaces and competitors who are also doing really good stuff too. So that's like super, super high level, and I'm happy to dive into more detail, but I think that's like overall the main approach that I would recommend, because most companies don't do that. Most companies like have maybe a editor, like one editor, an editor, or one content manager trying to corral like a couple freelancers or like one or two writers in-house. And usually they hit these glass ceilings or bottlenecks because they're not able to kind of break through and figure out how to systematize and process out stuff and all those things.
So what's the sweet spot of how many articles per month really move the needle?
It's a good question. We have clients that do, let's say, anywhere from like 5 to 10 on the low end a month. That's a good place to start. It depends a lot on resource allocation. So I'm going to like hedge that and say, if you can't, we have other clients that do 100 plus a month. If you can't do 100 plus a month, well, then you should probably do 5 or 10 really, really good ones a month.
Yeah.
And so that's where the hedging comes into play, where based on resource allocation, based on like the amount of time and effort you guys have, don't do like 100, 6 out of 10s, because that's not going to move the needle today. You're much better off doing lower volume and or even like 1 or 2. But if you do 1 or 2 and you have like original data in each one and you have design in each one, you have all these different assets included, then you're going to be much better off, again, in the long run. That's the short answer. Again, we have a lot of other clients that'll do 100 plus a month, but they're also really well funded, as you could imagine.
I can imagine that, yeah. So you need to have a consistent source of good writers, because in my experience, writers cap out of quality at like 8 pieces a month. Good writers. I mean, what's your system then? I know you have a system for finding the best writers that fit into, because it's not only good writers, but it's also writers that are going to work into your system.
For sure.
So tell me about your process for finding that.
Definitely. It's as much about the fit and the right type of writer as it is about like how good are they at actually writing anything. We also have different clients in our verticals. So we have like finance writers, cybersecurity writers, like SaaS writers. Usually writers who are good at one thing aren't always good at another thing. So in other words, sometimes it's stylistic. They're good at writing like formal, heavy research, or they're good at informal, more kind of like snarky, like something that would be appropriate in like the MarTech or SaaS space, but wouldn't be appropriate in like finance or something else that's heavily regulated industry. And then you could drill down too, like in MarTech, someone who's good at like SEO may not be good at PPC and may not be good at marketing automation or whatever. And so the easiest, it's not easy, the simplest approach we found is to look at a lot of writers. And so that means usually around that 1% mark in an ideal world, which means if we right now are working with something like 50 writers, part-time and full-time, then that means we've looked at like 5,000 plus writers. And the trick to doing that is to figure out a system that scales. In other words, like I personally can't review all these people. Like a lot of our senior people can't review all these people either because they're busy on actually doing the work for our company and clients. So it's very much like you approach it like a sales funnel. You approach it very much like cast the wide net and then get really, really specific in terms of what you're looking for, both like you said, in terms of actual writing ability, but then also the fit. And so we need writers. We're a remote company. We are an agency, which is very different from hiring an in-house writer. Like people need to move fast. They need to be able to focus on output, not just like intangible things that we want to see or would like to see in an ideal world. And so that we do things in the testing process that we can talk about that filter those people out. If that makes any sense as well. So
tell me about what do you do to filter them out? What's part of the funnel?
Yeah, definitely. So we run a ton of ads on an ongoing basis to kind of drive people in. In certain cases, we will go look for subject matter experts in specific fields if we're having trouble finding them and like try to do outreach manually. That approach doesn't scale. So it's usually reserved for like very specific things. So for example, we're not just looking for finance, but we're looking for like a really good accounting writer. That's going to be hard to find. So we might have to like actually go look for the best accounting content and then work backwards and figure out who those writers are and if they're available, and they're probably going to be expensive and all that stuff. But otherwise we're running a ton of ads on an ongoing basis. Then we have certain fields built into even the initial application where we're looking for very specific information, like send me something as a PDF, not a specific file format. So send it as a PDF, not this. Send me a LinkedIn URL, not a website URL. Send me published samples in this format. If you send it in the wrong format, you're automatically getting excluded. So we have like little automations built in just in the very first step to see like, can they follow directions? That's just like a super basic thing. If we're a remote company, we can't like knock on their cubicle and ask them where something is or why they're late or why they're missing a deadline. And so we need to be able to work on across time zones, and we need people who kind of like are already in that mindset too. So then from there, we go through the usual things like we want to see specific examples. So if we ask for published samples in X and they show us Y, we don't look at them. We keep them in a database, but we don't like manually actually vet them or go through them. We look for pricing ranges and then turnarounds as well. As an agency, we need people who are focused on output. And what I mean by that is we need to see a certain number of articles from someone each week, each month. Otherwise, it's probably not going to be a good fit. So even if someone's a great writer, but they can only do one a week or one a month, that's probably it's going to be way too hard on us because we're going to have to manage like hundreds of those people, We look for, if they tell us they can do turnaround an article in X amount of days, then we say, okay, great. We're going to pay you your rates for an article on this topic that you told us about in this amount of days. Please deliver it like this within this time frame, and we'll happily pay you even if we don't end up hiring you and working with you afterward. If it doesn't line up with what we're asking for, and if it doesn't meet the deadline, then we're not going to pay you. Like, this is very much like a trial. We don't interview them before this. We don't do anything. We just see, can you, again, hit deadlines, follow directions. And you'd be surprised at how many people during even this initial stuff that I've talked about, like complain about something or bring up problems and excuses or tell us they're good at one topic and we assign them something in that topic and they say, oh no, actually I don't want to write on that. Like, you'd be really surprised at how many people just disqualify themselves.
Yeah.
Even through this initial kind of vetting phase that we haven't even really gotten to the actual writing just yet.
It's something that I've faced many times where we're trying to onboard writers and we have a very specific system for getting a piece from A to Z. So we have like the brief and then the writers contributing to the brief as well. And we work on the outline together, and some writers, they look at that and they're just like, no, I can't deal with this. This is too much, which is fine. I understand that it's a lot. For some freelancers prefer to just get a topic and deliver a Word document. But I'm curious about what system actually have you found to win for both you and for the writers to get the piece that you're looking for.
For sure. Yeah. So we go through a couple things kind of like that too. We're very process oriented. And so we have like a training program. And so we'll do the initial test piece with somebody. We want it to be like 70% correct. You know what I mean? Like, we're not that, all the things I just mentioned probably make us sound unrealistic and like assholes, but that's not the case. Like, we're just looking for like, can this person deliver on what we're asking for the most part? And then we can train them, we can coach them from there. So once they kind of get in, then we slowly start to ramp them up. So in other words, most often you've probably seen this, writers you'll ask them like, hey, how many articles can you start with a week or a month? And they'll tell you a number, and then we automatically discount that internally. So they tell us like, oh, I could do 5 a week. And we're like, okay, so we're gonna start you with 1 a week. And we're gonna see how that goes. And we're gonna like slowly build you up over time. And so we put them through a training program where it walks through, here's how we wanna see intros done. Here's how we wanna see sections done. If there's client specific guidelines, then we'll add it to that. So we'll have them go through like the general process training, and then we'll also have them go through any training and materials that are specific to that client, to writing for that specific client. And as you can imagine, depending on the client, that might be a little bit, that might be basic stuff, like we do commas this way, or we do em dashes this way, or it might be super, super specific, like we only want to see sources from these places. And so we kind of force them to go through that as well. And then we start to give them a lot of feedback on the first article. And we usually expect 1 to 2 rounds of edits with those writers. And we're happy to like take them slower and pay them more throughout this process too, is the other thing. So it's kind of like a give and take where it's like, look, we're not going to like BS you. We'll be direct and blunt, but we'll be nice about it, and we'll pay you well, and we'll try to have everything organized, and we'll take care of all the like client management on the other side, and we'll hire you part-time, full-time, and pay you really well if that's what you want. And so it's kind of walking that fine line between the two worlds of holding people accountable, setting expectations and holding them accountable to those expectations, but then also like bending over backward to accommodate them if and when you do find the good people.
So the training, is it just going like reading a style guide that you've prepared, or how do you know that they have actually gone through it?
Yeah, the initial training is an actual training program that we built out in Trainual. It's pretty simple, like little lightweight software. So they literally have to like progress through reading and watching videos, and then even taking like short basic tests. They're super basic. They're like little multiple choice tests about the section you just watched. And then we can see, does someone complete that or not? If they don't complete it, we're not going to assign them work. It's as simple as that. And we tell them all this stuff up front. We tell them we'll pay them for their time. Like we try to be very transparent with all these things, but we do tell them like, look, we're not going to assign you anything if you don't go through. And built into that training too is everything like, how do I get paid? When do I invoice? Who do I invoice? Like all the things that usually crop up, all the soft unwritten rules that usually slip by, that confuse the hell out of writers too, because that's the other thing, is we don't want to mislead them unintentionally.
Yeah.
And so we try to build those things into this training, this initial training. The editing process will also try to reinforce this. So if they make an issue or a mistake on like how to cite an image, for example, then our editors will usually flag that in a comment and usually point back to like the original client style guideline that says like, hey, remember in this section, you need to do captions this way or whatever. And then we kind of, so that answers your initial question. We also keep track of editing time per writer, and we use that to also gauge. So I feel like I'm talking too long, but I'm happy to go into that too, of how we do that.
Yeah,
it's kind of like paired with this,
yeah,
this
please
training
continue.
idea. Cool. So okay. So we track we have senior editors and like associate editors depending on what they're looking for. So if it's senior editors, we're looking for accuracy, style. Associate editors are often looking at grammar, plagiarism, more basic stuff. We track editing time against writers, clients, and the pieces they're working on. So in other words, if someone, and we factor that into like what our barometer of writer quality is. So if someone is a good writer, but our editors are having to spend a lot of time editing their stuff, then that's an issue. And so we'll often, I think we give our editors a basic rule of thumb. Like if you think this is going to take longer than 30 minutes to edit, send it back. Like flag the main issues and send it back to the writer, because that means you're going to be spending way too much time on this. Whereas if we have writers who need very little to no editing at all, we'll happily give them raises like unprompted, like before they even ask, because what it means is we're spending less money and time on editors to oversee their stuff. And so that's another barometer we look at, is if we expect more at the beginning, we expect more editing time, for example, at the beginning, but over the first month, 2 months, that number needs to fall within a reasonable range. Otherwise, we'll often stop working with them or assign them less just because it's costing us too much internally. And again, they might be a great writer and they might be like a good person, but it's not, their current rates that they wanted aren't a good fit based on our structure overall.
And you mean 30 minutes total for a piece or per draft? Because you mentioned there were a couple of drafts.
That's a good question. Per draft, I would say.
Yeah.
So if there's multiple rounds of editing, with some clients, we have multiple rounds of editing because it helps. And with other clients, we try to not do that.
Yeah.
So where it helps is if you have different people on the client side reviewing that information. So an editorial review for style and accuracy versus like a technical review for more of like the technical details and know-how, which again, an outside writing team isn't going to know. That's like, we need that help. Or compliance is another one, especially in the finance space, where you need like a compliance officer to review and see if there's anything that could potentially get them in trouble with regulation or regulators, I should say. With most clients, that don't need those 2 extra steps, the technical and compliance, you really just try to get everyone on board into one round of reviews Otherwise, you'll just edit a piece for, you know, months on end, and that becomes a system and a process problem. And it's often a dysfunction of the team managing the project. And it's not a lot that we can do on the writing side or on the agency side, the third party side, because we only have so much control over everything. So
tell me about the structure of the team, because I guess, is the editor the same person who is coming up with the content strategy? And if,
no.
Okay, so when does that person come in after?
For sure.
Yeah, you tell me.
So we have our senior team, James and Jen. James is our director of editorial. He oversees style. So writers, editors, client specifications, and strategy. And then Jen is logistics, so operations, so logistics, scheduling, due dates, managing like overall client scheduling, all that kind of stuff. And then from there, underneath them, they have account managers and project managers on the operations side, or editors on the style side, the editorial side, and then writers. So James, for example, our strategy people will help figure out, like when we first bring on a new client, like who should be, based on what we're initially hearing and based on the space that this, you know, client is in, or this company is in, what kind of writers do they actually need and why? And then let's test a few of those people. And so they'll come up with the strategy for which, you know, keywords and topics you should be going after or not, how those things should look. So like client briefs, SERP analysis, all that kind of stuff. Editors will often work more, they'll have input on that stuff, but editors will often be more involved in the outline review based on like the content briefs and also the draft reviews and client specifications to make sure that we're getting up to speed on like client style and everything. So
do the editors, they also know, sorry, you do SEO, right? It's SEO.
Essentially, yeah. So
are the editors then able to you know, fulfill this vision, to execute the vision of the strategists?
Yeah, I mean, that's their job. No, so I mean, in fairness, a lot of times the editors are often looking at, they'll know of and be aware of specific like basic content optimization ideas. So for example, if, and this happens all the time, an editor from the client side wants to like change a paragraph, but then that screws up like some of the semantic keywords we were trying to hit in that paragraph. So the editor will often know and catch that kind of stuff. But otherwise, our internal like project managers will often be doing the things like, if we need to do image compressions, if we need to double check internal links that the writer was supposed to add, some of the other content optimization things, and some of the things that we're like trying to add into Wordable to automate all this stuff. Project managers will also kind of be in tandem to double check the writers and editors on how well they did that, or if they, you know, if anything slipped to the end of the gaps, because they do. When you do anything at volume, like stuff happens, mistakes happen. So yeah, we kind of have like double checks kind of built in where it's appropriate. So
this is, it's quite complex actually. This is how you, like
you could
the
say
simple
that.
Content.
You could say that.
But I guess this is different. The simple content system that you're talking about, is that just really more of a content strategy or kinds of content assets that you need to create, or is it the way that you structure your team?
It's not the way we structure. The way we structure our team is complicated because we are doing this like at a much higher volume than most other companies I know. You don't need to go to this like OCD level. The other hard thing from an agency's perspective that's much different than an in-house company is that we have specifications that are going to change from client to client. And that's a lot more difficult than if you're just doing this for one site with one basic understanding of what content should look like and one understanding what style should be. That's a lot different. I would say overall, and I think this might relate to like something you brought up earlier, I think for a more basic level, for most people, their initial goal is to figure out how do we optimize or how do we set up like an ongoing content strategy and what are the resources we need, meaning what's the mix of like internal people, freelancers, or agencies, and how do we kind of like set and forget the content strategy to a large degree. And so we could talk a little bit more about that. But I know a lot of the stuff that we do and the stuff that I just explained is definitely more of like a enterprisey approach, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense for a content agency to have those kind of systems, because otherwise you're not going to be able to fulfill to your clients. You need those kind of systems. However, a company might not need that same level of execution. You probably could simplify it. So tell me about what you just mentioned, the content strategy, and how B2B companies can build one that works.
For sure. Yeah. So I think first and foremost, it's understanding like what the right team mix should be before you hire anyone outside. That's also something that's not often done in practice. And the reason I say that is because, for example, each like in-house hires, in-house writers, editors, or excuse me, freelancers, like freelance writers versus agencies, all have their own like little pros and cons. If you need bottom of the funnel content, if you need intangible stuff like case studies, if you need opinion-oriented posts, if you need anything that's going to be gray, not black and white, or not concrete, often what you're a better fit is going to be like an in-house hire. And the reason for that is because you can take the time needed to train them in your space, and you need these people to really internalize like your unique point of view. Freelancers and agencies are going to struggle with that. I would say agencies might be a little better than that, only because they have more people. Whereas if you're trying to wrangle like 4 or 5 or however many individual freelancers, getting them all on the same page is a huge challenge. And so where they give you the benefit of flexibility, so you can ramp them up 1 month, you can ramp them down another month in terms of how much content you need, in terms of what your budget is every month. You can also find really good freelancers that don't need to be managed. However, you are going to have that consistency issue of trying to like get everyone to more or less sound the same, everyone to more or less like write to like a specific style, and that's challenging, as you can imagine. Whereas agencies are often great at scale if they're specialized. So I think that the trap people run into with agencies is they think that it like costs more, quote unquote, because they look at like the overall shock or sticker value. But what they don't often account for is all the soft costs that you should have, like project managers and strategy people and account managers and designers, and on top of writing. And the other trap with agencies is if you hire like a generalist agency, or if they're also doing your PPC, they should probably not be doing your content. Like these are two very different skill sets.
Yeah.
And if they haven't done a lot in your space, that may or may not also be a red flag too. So often you're essentially almost going to overpay for an agency in those cases where you're not actually getting like the value where they usually bring. If that makes any sense.
So there's a lot that you can do in-house, I think, as a growing company, but then there comes a time where depending on the structure of your team, and of course, if you don't have that many strong marketing people on the team, it makes way more sense to outsource to an agency that is specialized, that has done this before with a lot of other companies. Do you have any input on what kind of revenue a company is at that would make sense to invest in this kind of agency?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll try to answer that question with another question first. I think what usually is more helpful than revenue is like where your overall funding is at. And the reason I say that is because we've had cases, usually I would say agencies are great for scale. So in other words, from a revenue perspective, I don't know, like you should be doing over $1 million at the very least.
Yeah.
At the very least, like 1 to 5, probably on the low end. If you're venture backed, is probably good before bringing an agency, because an agency is great at taking you from like 5 to 10 in terms of million in revenue. An agency is probably not a great fit to get from like 0 to 5, or excuse me, like 0 to 1, unless you have a case where, let's say, a company raises a Series A, so they have all this money, but they don't have a marketing team in most cases. And that could even be like a large seed round. And in those cases, there's a CMO that gets hired, and he hires 3 or 4 different agencies to kind of like get the strategy off the ground for them. And then they're going to hire those teams in-house. And so we have worked in those cases, and that can work well if that CMO is good and knows what they want and knows what they're doing. Those cases can work well too, and that's where an agency could work well in that 0 to 1 million range. Otherwise, agencies are usually best at the scale. I gave like relatively lower numbers, but we also work with a lot of companies that are doing like hundreds of million in revenue, and that, again, that's where scale comes from for agencies, and I think that's where they excel like the best.
Okay, so I want to go back to talking about actual content strategy. I love that we talked so much about the team that we need to do this, but now we can talk about what it is that they are actually executing.
For sure.
I'm curious, what are your, I don't know, 3 most effective content plays in the last year for your clients?
For sure. Number 1 would be don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Is that the expression or the cliche? You have this weird thing over the last like couple of years where SEO has gotten incredibly difficult. Competitors are producing more better stuff. You're getting less like SERP real estate to actually fight over too, because Google likes making money more than they like to show you for free. So you have like all these like various factors. Yeah, exactly. Also too, like the rich get richer. So we could just keep piling cliches on. But the rich get richer in a sense of like, especially if you look at affiliate spaces and affiliate SERPs, huge websites are ranking for everything, even though the content quality sucks. And even though from a topic perspective or like niche or niche relevancy is not great. Like a topic authority standpoint isn't great, but they're just a huge website and a huge brand. And so therefore they're taking over. All that to be said, don't fight for things that you're not going to be able to win in the short term. So content overall is a long-term play, but if you can't rank for something within like the next 3 to 6 months, then don't bother doing it. Like go out and find, it's kind of a chicken and the egg problem. Like go find less competitive, lower volume stuff that you can rank for, because you do need to get bigger as a site before you can then go back and go after those like super competitive queries. Yeah. So that's one of the big things. And that's always a struggle on the agency side, where you kind of have to like convince clients of this approach sometimes, where it's like, unless you are going to throw millions of dollars at this, you're probably not going to rank for the number 1 or number 2 or number 3 keyword in your space. That's super commercial, because there's going to be other companies that are spending millions of dollars on those things. And so that's one of the first things, is you got to like fight the fights that you can win. That's a big one. Number 2 is think of content in like batches or groups. So in other words, if I'm doing keyword research, I don't want to just find like a bunch of one-off posts that might sound good or that might be relevant to what I do. I want to find little threads where I can produce like 10 articles in the same topic or same theme, and then multiply that several times. So in other words, we acquired Wordable last year in the summer sometime. We started looking through Google Analytics because traffic and customers were on the decline when we acquired it. We started looking through Google Analytics and noticed, okay, these top 5 posts are bringing the most traffic. That's the case for most websites. We dug into like, what are the actual topics and why are those ranking? And then with one of them, we found it was like, how do you do a strike through in Google Docs? That was the title. Super basic, super like not super related to what we're doing, but we need to grow the site overall before we can go back and compete with like digital marketing blogs, because those people are not done. We write and work with a lot of them on the agency side. And so the good news is we went out and found, okay, well, we can do probably, there's a ton of volume around features of Google Docs or add-ons for Google Docs. There's a ton of volume around that. There's a ton of different keywords that all have unique content showing up for those. So we know there's not going to be overlap between like one post ranking for, all 10 long tail variations. Keyword competitiveness was pretty good. It wasn't that hard or wasn't that difficult. We also can do our own link building and other stuff. So we can go after moderately competitive stuff with no problem. So in other words, you're thinking of this more as like a system and not like I'm just going to go through and find like a bunch of different unique ideas or topics to start with. I'm going to approach it like I need 100 pieces of content in 3 months to get my site to a certain level before I can then go back and go after the competitive stuff. So it's very much like a stair step, I guess, approach.
Yeah. It's like building topic clusters with a bunch of long tail keywords until enough of them are stacked.
Yep.
To where you can
exactly. And then shifting our approach. And then the good news about those is you can create like content templates. So in other words, you can create like, 3 outlines for 30 different topics and then assign to writers, like, here's how these things should look, like very, very specifically. And that often means you can use or get away with spending less money on content because you don't need expert level writers because they are so formulaic. And so by doing little kind of like tricks like that, we're able to then say, okay, now I'm gonna, for these other pieces that are gonna be really difficult, like, you know, content marketing analytics or something that's gonna be very competitive and subjective, that's where we spend a lot of money on really good writers and design and other things, because we know that it's gonna be much tougher to compete for that kind of stuff.
Brilliant. Brad, this has been a great conversation. I certainly have enjoyed it. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So where's the best place for people to connect with you if they want to talk to you more?
Yeah, definitely. The best place is probably go to wordable.io. As I mentioned, we've rebuilt it. So we're adding new import sources. So it's still very much tied to Google Docs because a lot of teams use that, but you're going to be able to use other things soon. So if you write in other areas, we're adding a bunch of like the on-page optimization and all the manual time-consuming stuff you usually have to do. So some of the things I think we even talked about, like opening links in a new tab and image compression and like all those annoying things you usually have to do inside the CMS afterward. We're also kind of automating a lot of that stuff for you. And then we're adding CMS integrations. So not just WordPress, but HubSpot, Medium, Shopify, BigCommerce, Contentful. Yeah, a lot of the other like headless ones are on the horizon too. So in time, it should be a very, very useful tool, hopefully, to a lot of people that do publish a lot of content. Because again, we on the agency side, we manually have to do all this time-consuming, soul-sucking work, and it's hard and expensive and annoying. And so we're hoping to like make that less sucky for everyone.
Excellent. All right, Brad. Thank you so much again for your time. And if whoever is watching or listening to this episode, and if you enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with your friend or colleague, and we'll see you online. Goodbye.
See ya.